How can you bridge the gap between knowledge and policy? Hi, this is Lucy, and you're listening to Bridging Knowledge and Policy, a podcast from the Institute for Governance Reform. The Institute for Governance Reform is a research and advocacy think tank based in Freetown, Sierra Leone. In this episode, I'm here with Paul Jibateh, a Sierra Leonean public relations practitioner, and he's here to talk about hate speech in Sierra Leone and the media. But what can we say are the factors of hate speech in Sierra Leone? Join us as we explore this episode. Just to give us a broad idea on what's really hate speech is, what's your opinion of hate speech?
Hate speech. I know dictionaries might have tried to pin this into some sort of definition and sort, and to give it either an English or a Kringlish definition. But I like to go freestyle. Essentially, it's a two-word combined to one: hate and speech. Speech meaning to speak, the ability to utter words, and hate having negativity or some sort of semblance or an iota of negativity in what you say. So to just basically for the lay comprehension and understanding of people out there, talking about a particular thing with a negative sense into it, or using some sort of negative vibe or tonation to it, and surrounding it with all forms of negativity in essence. That's just what, in a lay comprehension, what hate speech should be and what I think it is.
Okay, so what has been the current state of hate speech and the Australian media?
This question is interesting because we have the consciousness of hate speech now because of the amplification it has gotten in the few years building up towards what we have coming up next year, the elections, which is bringing all of this tension. But the fact is, there has always been negative speaking. There's always been hate speech in Sierra Leone and the world at large. What has made people more aware about what hate speech is or tend to be is because of the application, which is a result as to the technological aspect of what hate speech has gotten. What do I mean by that? Before now, we did not have social media. Okay, as rampant as it is now. Of course, we had the MySpace, the Hi-Fi, but they were not too popular. And people were just using those for text communication. But now there is WhatsApp, there is Twitter, there is Facebook, and all of these platforms and the other very new ones have audio and video capability. So people can say negative things and distribute around. But there has always been people talking about certain things negatively before now. But because of the analog age, the medium and platforms for distribution were not that forthwith then. But now it is everywhere. So if you say something in your bedroom, you can amplify it to the rest of the world with just the press of the button. So technology has done us a lot of good, but the popularity or the notoriety of hate speech is one of the negative effects we have as a result of technological advancement and development in Sierra Leone and the world over.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you want to say this is a growing problem for Sierra Leone being a peaceful, tolerant country?
Growing problem. I tend to be very careful of how I use the word problem. I'll call it a challenge because it's a clarion for the old, the young, and up and coming, and everyone in Sierra Leone to raise the standards by which we live, the standard by which we speak, and to even get to a mature state to an understanding that yes, you can feel something, but you don't necessarily need to utter what you feel. So that space, it's a thin line, and not everybody has grown to that maturity. It's a clarion for everybody to grow up, for everybody to wise up, for everybody to know that indeed, in the Creole parlance, you would say it's salon force before any other thing else. You're a Sierra Leonean, you're a person and a Sierra Leonean before every other affiliation comes into play. And when you carry your passport within or outside Sierra Leone or wanting to cross the borders, you're not asked about other infinitesimal affiliations. Primarily, the principal consideration you're given is where you're coming from, Sierra Leone, and you're an African. And it's a challenge which can be handled with the competence I see around Sierra Leone. And don't forget that decades before now, Africa and some people around the world, Sierra Leone was a hub for education.
Yeah. Yes.
Sierra Leone was a hub for education. And somewhere along the line, we dropped that ball. But that is not to say we cannot pick that back up, dust it off, and be there again. And so it's a challenge that everybody can rise up to and say, yes, we can have affiliations other than Sierra Leonean, even within Sierra Leone, to have affiliations. The Constitution of Sierra Leone guarantees that, the freedom of assembly, association, and stuff. And yes, it is a legal right. It is a domestic right. I have a right to belong to my family. I did not even choose my family, as a matter of fact. That decision was made somewhere in the celestial. So I came down and I'm part of the family. Even within the family, I love coffee, for instance, and probably my mom and dad do not like coffee. I like to drink tea. That does not mean that we should tear the family apart because of our likings and our givings to things are different. Varieties is part of life, and the appreciation that everyone has a right to be different, just like all of us have different thumbprint, is that maturity that we should rise up to, grow up to as a nation, and also realize that we should apply that sense of responsibility and maturity to every sphere of life, professionally, domestically, socially, and even politically as well.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. You mentioned that hate speech can be handled, right?
It certainly can be handled. Yes.
One would want to ask how.
Okay. Let me take you back a few years down the line. There wasn't the prevalence of social media as we have it now. So there was and still is the opportunity for people to have media houses created. The IMC would give you the platform as long as you're registered as a business and you're coming to the media to establish same. So in 2012, there was the APC and SFP radio. Now, before then they were created, and then the 2012 elections came, and then those platforms were used for deliberate dissemination of hate speeches for political gains. And the government stood up and shut those radio stations down. It was a tough call, but it was necessary. That is just one example.
Exactly.
Just one example. It brought a semblance of fresh air into that process, I would say. And coming back to stopping it or minimizing it, you cannot stop people talking negatively. Okay? You cannot stop people hating, just like you cannot stop people loving. It's going to be there.
Yeah.
But can you stop ignorance? No. Can you stop education? No. You should. People will be educated either way. It should be a deliberate and conscious effort. First of all, I would go back to government, because it is the responsibility of government wholly. But it starts from the home. There are some homes you cannot rain insults against one another. There are homes you shouldn't talk negatively when your parents or your siblings are around. So it begins from the home. All of what the family units, social studies in schools. If we go back to education now, plugging in civics into the education system, making it a core all through, for instance, primary and secondary school. That's education, and let me call it reorientation of the generation that is coming up now, and even those of us around now. I'm not a religious person, but let me just state this is a fact in the Quran and the Bible, that faith cometh by hearing, and hearing of the word. So also just negativity comes by hearing, and hearing of the word. Insults come. You know what's that, because if you know the every person cause.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So all of these things, it's the auditory function of a man has a lot of power, and so and thus the vision of a person has a lot of power. So what you hear tend to regurgitate inside of you as a person, and it plays back like a replay, like a movie replaying in your mind. And once you have been hurt, it in a way comes out naturally if you do not have so much control of a person, of yourself, not to respond to certain things, to certain stimulus. It's very important. But I believe, for one, I go back to government and come back as down and earthy as I can get, that it's the family first that should inculcate this in the children we give birth to, in the relations we have. For instance, I happen to have lived in a neighborhood where I had a neighbor who had the let me call it, the style of sweeping and burning dirt during the weekends. That is a major, in the legal field, we call that a major source of nuisance. But to have handled that responsibly took me to step out to them and tell them about the effect it's having on us. I know they were trying to solve a problem, but their problem was was affecting me negatively. Yes. And so it's first of all told them that it was wrong environmentally and the impact it's having, that the city council itself do not want that to happen. Look for ways to discard or dispose of your waste bins responsibly. There are a lot of people, like they call them clean salon. Pack those things. It doesn't take you 2 million, 3 million. The highest it will take you to 5 million per weekend to dispose of those things. But some other person, or in some other situation, that would have been a major cause for conflict and the raining of insult. Fatherly, motherly, childrenly invectives would have been showered in such situations. And that brings up enmity within neighbors. We shouldn't be, because we need one another. We need one another at every point in time.
Going back to government, you mentioned earlier, and you stated that most of the causes of hate, some of the causes of hate speech, is politically affiliated.
Yes.
So you'd want to say, in this current state of rise of hate speech in the country, is it feasible that governments can play that role that you mentioned in 2012? Do you think there was a chance for that to happen?
Lucy, it's feasible, and not only feasible, it's practicable. I don't like to point to other countries, but it has happened in places like, I'm not going to go out of Africa. It has happened in places like Rwanda. Rwanda, it's a crime to tell somebody that you are a Hutu or a Tutsi at any point in time after their conflict. Go down 20 years back, 2004, 20 years plus back. This nation had a devastating war. Not only a war like we had it, it was a tribal war. Hutus were killing Tutsis and Tutsis were killing Hutus. It was a neighbor-like war. If your neighbor is a Tutsi, you recommend that they will be killed, and your neighbor is a Hutu, they should be killed. So it started from people churning out messages on radio, calling certain people cockroaches and stuff like that, all kind of names and stuff like that. So then it escalated from that to something else. But going back and coming back to the Rwanda of now, that has been criminalized. For instance, you dare not call somebody by their, let me quote and unquote, let me say by their tribe.
Just that
everyone is a Rwanda.
Someone might be tempted to say, in Sierra Leone at the moment, maybe the hope is kind of fading out.
It's not fading out. It's practicable. As I said earlier on, it's for us all to rise to that level of maturity. Governance is totally different from partisan politics. The people we cling to, say we follow or call, quote and unquote, I hate to use this word, but people use it a lot, moral guarantors. And we are moral guarantors for those people. Civilization started here. The Westerners, okay, for instance, let me use the United States and UK as an example. There is a Democratic Party and there is the Republican Party and all other little ones. There is Labour and Conservative in England. Now, partisan politics is permitted. But when it comes to governance, it's an entirely different space. So to detox the minds of people coming into governance, getting appointments, and separating your partisanship from the governance of Sierra Leone is something that is practicable, something that is feasible, something that we can do as Sierra Leone. But it takes a deliberate effort. The rule of law has to play its part if you are not a player in governance and you bring partisan politics into governance, you should be taken out.
Yeah.
You make 1 and 2 examples, people will own up, people will sit up. But it takes, let me use the word tough. It takes a tough leader to do that. And have we seen it in Sierra Leone? I would boldly say we are yet to get there. We are yet to get there, but we can get there. We can get there. That is why people like us are standing up for people in our generation and generations coming up, and even talking boldly to those who are above us generationally to say, hey, Mama, Papa, this thing cannot be so.
Yeah.
You taught us the right things, and this is not what you taught me back in school. So it can be practical. Going back to our laws, making these things legally prohibited, and then coming back to the basis of reorientation and sensitization of people about these things. It's a lot of effort, it's a lot of things, but it should be deliberately crafted. The parties in this country, all 16 of them, you big, you are medium, you are small, should sit down. The leadership of this party should sit down and draft, for me, I think, let us have a 50-year plan for Sierra Leone, 50-year development plan that no matter which party comes to the governance platform should adhere to, should follow, so that we don't have this system of having 5 steps forward and 10 steps backward.
Exactly.
When one party comes and they erase every other thing that other party has done.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be so. It is practicable, it is feasible, going back to your question, and it is possible. We just have to wake up and do the right things.
Okay. So being that I'm not sure, but which platform, is it the old media or the new media, would you want to say hate speech is more prevalent?
Hate speech has been there, as I said, but the new media has made it more, it has amplified it. Yes, that is what. But going back to your question, we can use both. Just like I am left-handed, but I cannot use my left hand to shake somebody in the street or formal occasions. I just have to use my right hand. Okay, so both hands are good. So it's when you put 2 hands together, the one can even clap.
Yeah.
So it takes both the old and new. Some people are lettered, meaning the old media of printing and broadcast, basically printing words. Not everybody at the moment can go through printed words, especially in English, and goes back to our education system, which can change. We can get education with our local languages, which will be possible. The fact that one does not speak English doesn't mean that the person is ignorant in any sense or any way. Okay, we can speak and write in our local languages, and we take another deliberate reforms in our education system. Yes, both medias are possible. Any other media that would rise or be awakened in our next 2 to 3 years, because you never can tell what the development trend, especially in the technological world, can do. So every relevant and important medium should be used.
So lately, it's like we're having this conflict of freedom of speech and hate speech. How would you want to determine the line between freedom of speech and hate speech?
Now, I'll have to go a bit into legalities as I respond to this question. Now, there is a right. Okay, everyone has a right. Now, the extent to which one person has a right stops at where your responsibility begins and the right of the other person also begin.
Yeah.
So not to cross that line is where the challenge is.
Exactly.
People not knowing how to handle such. Yes. Just like I mentioned earlier, the analogy I gave about my neighbor burning dirt.
Yeah.
Okay. They have a right to have done so within the confines of their compound. Yeah. But there is no way they could control our smoke.
Exactly.
It comes back to my own compound. Sure. And that breaches their own rights and in a way diminish their responsibilities. Yeah. So I had to come back and raise that bar. Say, we can't be responsible whilst doing our own. So within the parameters of right, responsibilities, and not talking, you can talk negatively to yourself all day if you want in a room. No one would do anything to you. But to come out and rain insults on anyone, a child, old or young, then that is where the boundary is crossed. You've taken your right into the confines of another person's right. And every person, in legal term, this is land law now, they will tell you you do not have a right to disturb another person's quiet enjoyment. Yes, it could either be nuisance or trespass, and you don't have a right to trespass into another person's, let me call it, territorial integrity.
Okay, so that's kind of explains hate speech, but bringing it down to the whole political context, which really fuels this whole thing,
Yeah.
and we have like personalities who tend to ignite the issue of hate speech. What would you want to say about that?
Now, I do not have anything against politics. We cannot get into a platform of governance without politics. But just like you have some sense and an iota of recklessness and negligence in every profession, whether it's the teaching, where you talk about people, exam malpractice, or the medical field, yeah, is a medical negligence. The legal field, there is legal negligence and all of that. So also, the political space has political negligence. Let me call it that, and people tend to use that for their own political gains, because majority of the, let me call it, the populace are gullible. They tend to take what a political leader say hook, line, and sinker without evaluating it internally first, and having that strength of personhood to determine which is true and what is not true, and to follow the right in that direction. So you find out that when that is the case, these political leaders tend to utilize that for their own personal gains and benefit, and that is not right at all. If you are aware that a certain sector or a certain sphere of the public are gullible, to speak to them, by them to do things wrong and cause violence in society is definitely not right. It is political negligence, and I think people should be held accountable for every sort and form of political negligence that we have seen in society, and especially so coming up to the next phase of our elections cycle. Registrations have just been completed, and that is very it's a success as a country. We want to give kudos to those who were there acting as key actors and evaluators of that, and observers as well. Students of the sensitization should continue about non-violence towards our campaigns. Campaigns will soon begin, and non-violence on electioneering day itself. As we go to the polls, we do not necessarily need to fight. Just like, let me use the football analogy. Two teams can come, and play. You have a right to support team A, you have a right to support team X. Within the course of the match, you can talk passionately about certain things. And even when you talk with passion, you see that when it is football, people don't put negativity into that passionate talk. Do you get me?
Yes.
But if it's out of that sphere and it comes to politics, you start seeing people bringing in invectives into such talking and stuff like that. But it shouldn't be the case. We can't do our elections without violence. We can do our elections without hate speech. It is possible. To my point again, everybody should grow up. Every Sierra Leonean should grow up, no matter who you are. Sierra Leone comes first. I had some sense of consciousness during the war. It was painful for me to have left my home, to leave Sierra Leone. First of all, to Guinea, stayed in Guinea for 8 months. It is touching. I'd never used Kenu, what we call Pampa in local parlance. I used Pampa from government WAF, from big WAF to Conakry. I'd never done it in my life, but I had to do it. But now with where I am, if you ask me to do that again, I would say no.
Yeah.
I'll say no. I'll say no to that. So it was a tough time, and we just had to take that, come back, and then there were other interruptions of government. We saw that, and we are grateful to go for where we are now. So I would not want anything to happen to this country again. I wouldn't want to go back to such history. It should teach us lessons that, yes, if you have been out of Sierra Leone and have been treated as a second-class citizen elsewhere, then you would understand what this means to keep your country first. Yes, and to raise our own standards and propagate them as Sierra Leoneans and nothing less.
So in that light, would you say Sierra Leone is slowly becoming less cohesive?
Oh, that's it's a whole new ball game when you talk about national cohesion. The pundits out there would want to say so, but I look at the cup. I choose to look at the cup as half full than half empty. We have our challenges, like every other nation in the world, including the Western nations. Gladly, we don't have a situation where somebody will pick up a gun in Sierra Leone and go into a school and start killing people there.
Yeah.
So we don't have a situation where people start, all of these social ills. It happens even in Western countries. Now, where these Western countries were and where Sierra Leone is, there was no social media when there was the 1775 struggle. Patrick Henry's declared that it's either you give me liberty or give me death, when America wanted to have its independence from the United Kingdom. So there was no social media to propagate it then. The flaws they had during their course of development, they are 200 years plus now. But here we have Sierra Leone. Our development was interrupted, and so was the rest of Africa, interrupted by colonization. We are taken back 500 years plus backwards, and we had to restart. And now we are saying we are 60-something years old. And now there's social media to point out all of our flaws, growing, rebuilding back. So the idea of cohesion is always pointed to the fact that we are not united. You won't know that Sierra Leoneans are united except you meet a Sierra Leonean outside of Sierra Leone. There's always tend to be that togetherness. We have right to have bondings on our tribal platforms, to have affinities, but we shouldn't use that to spite on other people. We shouldn't use that to as a source for negativity or as a tool to fight against others. It's a sense of belonging to come from a place, yes, but principally we are Sierra Leoneans. So the idea of cohesion is just like as a person, personal development, you work on yourself, constantly write books, eat well to stay healthy. It's something we shouldn't give up on. Our laws can help us in that regard to legalize certain things and criminalize certain others. For me, I think it's improved greatly because I see, for instance, intermarriage is happening.
Yeah.
Intermarriage is happening everywhere. There's no restriction from you from the east not marrying the west, you from the north not marrying the south, and it's happening. So that has bring a lot of bonding into us. You go to the east, you see northerners living and doing business there. You go to the south, you see easterners living and doing business there. You go to the north, you see southerners living and doing business there. And it has improved. It has improved a lot more. But that is not to say we should be comfortable with where we are now. There's a lot more to be done. There's a lot more we can achieve to bring our cohesiveness into a perfect union. It's a journey, and we shouldn't stop moving forward.
Yes, exactly. So, well, lastly, just going back to what you said, so one would want to say, yes, there are intermarriages. We eat the same cassava leaves. We marry each other. But then when it comes to politics, that's the only time we'll see the wrong side of ourselves.
Yes, yeah, that is correct. That is mostly the time you see the sensitivity of certain gaps in our society. I'll call it so. That is because of how the principal players within our political sphere, handle the situation. Been privileged to be on the other side of things. The truth is, and people should know this, campaign is a time where it's just there are times in our secondary school where you have to debate, or the colleges you have to debate, and in debating you take a theme or topic. You just have to propagate the good about what you've chosen.
Yeah.
And also, your opponent will try to point to the ills and odds of the theme you've chosen. For instance, it could be a topic that mothers are better than fathers.
Yeah.
If I am talking for my mother, or I choose to defend the fathers, I'll talk about the good side of the fathers.
Exactly.
But in essence, does not cast a negative aspersion on my mom. The gullibility of certain aspects of society he would hold that negative, let me call it pitch, that I've made, to generalize it now, like all mothers are this, all mothers are that, or all fathers are this. So that is what it is really. Campaigning is about making their points known so that it can convince the public to vote for them. That is not in essence to say even these politicians are bad people. Because as I wanted to say earlier on, behind the curtains, they are very good friends.
Yeah.
Behind the curtains, they strike deals, they make merriment. Some even have their family connections. We are interconnected and interrelated in one way or the other. You find out that this politician and that politician is uncle, that and that nephew. So it's a mix of things. But to just disintegrate what they will be saying during the campaigning period is where the challenge is for most people. And some people take their word as yea and amen and act on those words. And if you have, which is why we should have platforms to check and evaluate certain things that is going to be said, or actions that might be inspired from such pitches in society, which is why I think the security sector should own up and step up as well, come up with a lot of maturity on how to respond to such things. There are certain things that do not need force at all times, even when you want to apply force, it should be proportionate. So the stimuli you are getting from the public, it shouldn't be excessive. It shouldn't be excessive. So I think, again, I go back to what I said earlier. It's a call, a clarion for all of us to rise up to the occasion and be mature as Sierra Leoneans in our personal, social, and political givings as a people.
All right. So thank you very much for being here with us today, and thank you for being our guest, Paul.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Bridging Knowledge and Policy. For more information on IGL's research and advocacy, visit our website on iglsl.org.